We are back in the booth with Jake Porway, data scientist at Data Without Borders. Jake, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So what is the mission of Data Without Borders?
So the mission of Data Without Borders, very simply, is to unite nonprofits and NGOs who have data and big data problems with socially conscious data scientists who want to work together with them on data to help the world, really in the service of humanity. And while I think that's really the main goal of what we want to do achieve in this, what we want to do is get out there and actually help them look at their data, help the few groups that don't have the resources to look at that data themselves. I think what comes out of this is actually a much broader mission. So we have that sort of assistance mission, but in addition, we're bridging these two communities. We really want this to be an experience where we're not just delivering services to them, but we're also educating them about the importance of data, training them so that they can work on data themselves. And so in the process, I think what we're really hoping to achieve out of this is something that brings new problems to the data science community, also helps nonprofits deal with their data, and brings sort of an interchange between the two, so that where there's really more of an open communication and more things can come out of that. For example, opening up data or freedom for more conversation to flow between the two sides.
So how did the project come about?
So the project came about, I think we realized that there's a huge amount of energy in the data science community. I was shocked when I moved back to New York to find that there were people spending all of their time in hackathons.
Yeah.
There were people spending their weekends working on projects, and there was all of this energy around people not just playing, but really doing amazing things, writing new machine learning algorithms, working with the most advanced data science tools. And it just felt like there needed to be another place for that to go. There's this recognition that out of all of that, what was coming out of it was another blog post about a project that someone had worked on, another restaurant review app.
Another visualization.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
And those things are great. Don't get me wrong. They have their place. But, there's this realization that if we were using some of the most advanced technologies in the world, we should maybe be using them to help advance the world. Sure. And so at the same time, there are all of these nonprofits and NGOs who are stuck in the same data deluge that we are. I think here at Strata, we're realizing that businesses are just starting to understand the importance of data. Nonprofits are in the same boat.
Right.
They're just figuring out how important it is, and they're as awash in it as everyone else is. They're generating their own data. There are third parties, like governments, that are opening up their data. So all of a sudden, they find themselves in a situation where there's a huge amount of data around social causes, but they have almost no resources to look at it. There's not really, they're way too interested, and necessarily so, in understanding where their next donation is going to come from, how they're going to get their projects done, to worry about learning something like Hadoop or hiring a full-time data scientist. And so it just seemed like a really natural pairing to say, well, hey, we've got all these people who are doing amazing things with the most cutting-edge technologies. Yeah. They're spending their spare time doing it, but they don't necessarily have socially conscious outlets for it. And then you've got nonprofits who are sitting here awash in data, and they don't have anyone to look at it for them. And so it just seems very natural to say, well, could we team up? Can we get these two together? And so, that was sort of the genesis of the idea, and from there it's grown into what it is.
You touched on this a bit, but how data literate are NGOs and nonprofits?
I think
that's too general a question. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of nuance with that.
Well, I think that's actually, that's a really great point. I don't think it's too general a question, but I think it's sort of like coming to Strata and saying, how data literate are businesses?
Sure.
So
it is too general a question.
Well, yeah.
Right.
But it's really interesting because I think you're starting to see very similar stripes of the way nonprofits are literate with data in the same way that businesses are becoming literate with data. So you have a few that understand it fairly well, and that are looking at data in big ways. There's actually a group called NetHope. And NetHope is a collection of maybe 30 of the top NGOs, CTOs, and CIOs. And they're very aware of the data problem. They're very aware that there is a huge amount of data out there. They run hackathons. They are trying to bring the data science community in to help them out with this. And so you see groups like that who have really been fighting in the trenches for data and technology for years and have already been there. They just maybe need a little bit of help. So there are those who are very data literate. And then there are some that are just sort of starting to figure it out, who are kind of catching the winds of change and realizing it's coming. And then, of course, there are many as well who are, not quite set up to work with data yet and are still figuring it out. But I think that very well mirrors the way the business world is looking at data these days. And I think you hit on a really good point at the end, was to say that, there are new nonprofits that are coming up that are run by younger people, that are run by more tech-savvy people. And as you also see the nonprofit world move to a state where there are more mobile applications, more web applications, there's necessarily more of a data DNA to these nonprofits. So we're seeing this kind of new class of nonprofits, at least in some of the few groups that we've been talking with, who are much more aware of data and thinking about data from the very start. So it's a very broad spectrum.
Sure.
You know, there's some who really get it, some who are still, you know, have index cards and shoeboxes. But I think overall you're seeing a growing trend that they're becoming much more data literate. They just need the help. They need someone there to say, what exactly do you want from this data? What kind of questions can you actually answer from this data? I think just like businesses, they've gotten to step one of like, well, maybe we should collect this stuff. You know, and that was a big step.
Right.
But now there's this growing realization like, well, now what?
Now what do we do?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's a very broad range.
Last question for you.
Yeah, sure.
What sorts of applications and outputs are you hoping for?
Sure. I think that's actually a really good question because, you know, especially because a lot of our first events are around these ideas of data dive weekends, there might be a tendency to think, oh, well, we're going to write software for nonprofits, or we're going to do a little app for a nonprofit. But I really think that the output of this could be anything in the data science pipeline. So it could be something like an analysis. You know, you could come into a statistical analysis. It could be a visualization or an API. But as well, it could even be a consultation. You know, it could be enough to say, look, you came to us with this data that you collected from a survey, and you wanted to answer these questions, but you know you missed an important piece of data. So that next time you go out in the field, you should be looking for that kind of data. You know, so it could be something to say, these are the questions you're trying to answer, and this is the way that you would be able to answer it. So really anything in sort of the statisticians or data scientist toolbox, from consultations to helping create surveys to data management techniques to analysis or visualization. And so those are sort of the short-term kinds of wins and goals that we hope to get out of this. But I think maybe in the broader sense, you know, I think alluding to what I was talking about earlier is that the broader goal, I think, is that we help nonprofits recognize the importance of data and make that really a fundamental part of their organization and their business. I mean, right now they need to defend what they're spending their money on. If I give money to Save the Children, I want to see that my money went to
the children.
Exactly, went to the children, right? I don't want to I don't want to see your bill for EC2, right? And so that's kind of the thing that, you know, we want to change a little bit, or at least alleviate from them a little bit, to say we can come in and provide those resources, and hopefully that's not something people would shirk away from in the future, because they would recognize it's just a necessary part of doing business like anything else. So that's where we are.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.